Hello all, welcome to the SecurityTube Linux Assembly Expert course and certification. Now in this video, we will look at CPU registers for 64-bit systems. So if you look at any computing device which you use, you could go ahead and break up the architecture into the CPU, the memory to go ahead and hold data, and I/O devices with which we communicate with the external world, and all of them connected together via the system bus to exchange data as well as to go ahead and have instructions run. So if I were to extrapolate the CPU further, I would logically break it up into first the control unit, and the job of the control unit is to retrieve and decode instructions as well as data. Now after this we have the actual execution unit. Now the execution unit is the one which can understand and interpret these instructions and go ahead and actually execute them. Now, of course, the execution unit is going to require a temporary workbench where it can go ahead and store data, remember state and things like that. And this is where registers and flags come in. So registers are internal memory locations which are used like variables and keep changing depending on the context of what the execution unit is doing. And flags indicate different events that may be happening while the execution is running. So as an example, if an instruction leads to a 0, then an appropriate flag is set so that later instructions can check for what happened, and you can have things like branching, program flow, and all of that, right? So this is a very high level description, but honestly, I think we need not go too deep into how the execution unit, the control unit, and all of these work, simply because that would be more relevant from a computer architecture and design perspective. So let's jump into the registers. Now there are different types of registers. You have general purpose, and after that, depending on your processor, you can have the FPU, you can have MMX, SSE, and a bunch of other things out there. Right now, we will restrict our discussion to the general purpose registers, and at an appropriate stage, when we start looking at writing shell code with FPU instructions and all of that, we will look at other forms of registers. I'm doing this to ensure you don't have to go ahead and look at too many things early on, because the number of CPU registers on a 64-bit system is way higher than what you encountered on a 32-bit system. So there are a total of 16 general purpose registers. The first 4 of them are RAX, RBX, RCX, and RDX. And if you've already looked at 32-bit assembly, RAX is nothing but EAX extended further by another 32 bits. So if you look at any of the general purpose registers, you can go ahead and access the lower 32 bits, the lower 16 bits, and the lower 8 bits, right? And to do this, you further subdivide the naming of the register. So if you'd like to access the whole 64-bit, you can use RAX. For the lower 32 bits, it's EAX. The lower 16 bits, it's AX, and for the lower 8 bits, it is AL. Now you can also access basically the higher order byte inside AX by using AH, right? And this is really going from position 8 to position 15. Similarly, you have RBX, RCX, and RDX, which are again subdivided into EBX, ECX, and EDX for the lower 32 bits, and then you have BX, CX and DX for the lower 16 bits, and then BL, CL and DL for the lower 8 bits, with the possibility of also accessing the higher byte of BX, CX and DX using BH, CH and DH. Now, there's one very important thing. If you notice, I've marked AH, BH, CH and DH in a totally different color. The reason is there are restrictions on when you can access each of these values and use them in your program, which I will discuss in just a bit. Now, these are the first 4 general purpose registers. After that, you have RSI, RDI, RBP and RSP. RSP is basically the stack pointer. And if you look at, again, there is a further subdivision. So to access the whole 64-bit, you can reference RSI, RDI, RBP or RSP. To reference the lower 32 bits, it's ESI, EDI, EBP and ESP. To reference the lower 16 bits, it is SI, DI, BP and SP. And to reference the lower 8 bits, it is SIL, DIL, BPL and SPL. In this case, there is no way to access the higher byte of SI, DI, BP and SP. Right? Now, I think many of you coming from a 32-bit assembly background would probably be familiar with this simply because you're used to the EXX format. Now, these are the top 8 registers, but after that, on 64-bit systems, there are 8 other brand new registers. And the naming starts from R8 to R15. And similar to what we've seen in the case of the first 8 general purpose registers, you can access the whole 64 bits by using RX, which is R8, R9, R10, whichever register you're interested in. You can access the lower 32 bits by using RXD, where X can be 8, 9, 10 up to 15. You can access the lower 16 bits by using RXW, which can be R8W, R9W, again depending on the register. And finally, the lower 8 bits by using RXB, right? Again, the higher byte of RXW is not accessible. This is important, keep that in mind, right? So really, if you notice, for any given general purpose register, we can access the whole 64-bit or the 32-bit lower side, or the 16-bit on the lower side, or 8 bits on the lower side, right? And in a rare circumstance, just for RAX, RBX, RCX and RDX, you can also access the higher byte using AH, BH, CH and DH. So now let's come to the conditions under which AH, BH, CH and DH can actually be used. Now this is super important, and I've pretty much plagiarized the whole thing from Intel's manual. So if you look at it, here is what they state. An instruction cannot reference legacy high bytes, example AH, BH, CH and DH, right? And one of the new byte registers at the same time, right? For example, the lower byte of the RAX register. So this is something which is very important, and you should always keep in mind. And there are a bunch of other things as well which he will take up as appropriate, and I wouldn't want to kind of give you too many details at this point. Now we talked about general purpose registers. What about the flags which we saw in the CPU architecture diagram? Now, if you've come from a 32-bit background, you know that you have E flags register, which consists of multiple flags such as trap, sign, 0, blah blah blah, and we'll take these up as and when appropriate in the course. The 64-bit version of the flags register, called the R flags, really has 32 bits entirely reserved, right? And just the E flag register after that. So pretty much R flags is E flags padded with a reserved 32 bits in the front. There is no other difference. Finally, the instruction pointer or RIP. I think if you're from the shell coding and exploit research world, this is really the holy grail, right? You want to control RIP register so that you can have the system do your bidding. Now, people who've gone ahead and done the 32-bit course know that there you have EIP. And the good news is that RIP has something called relative addressing, which actually makes shell coding very, very easy compared to the 32-bit case. We'll take it up later on in the course. So it might be a good idea that you should download the Intel manuals locally from this link provided. And wherever you feel you need more information about the nitty-gritty details, I would highly recommend and encourage that you can view the Intel manuals. So I think I don't like to finish any video without a demo. So let me go ahead to our Ubuntu machine and let's try and see how the registers and all of that looks like from inside GDB for a 64-bit system. So this is the older program which I had given you guys. If you've not seen it, go back to the older videos. Let me load up this program from within GDB. And now let me add breakpoints, or rather even before that, let me set the disassembly flavor to Intel, and then let me disassemble main. And if you notice, you see a lot of assembly language instructions in here. Most of this may be Greek to you at this point, and which is absolutely fine. All I really want to show first is how the registers are used and kind of look like within the program. So you can see we have an instruction which says push RBP, just pushing 64 bits on the stack, and we learn about all of this a little later, so do not worry if everything sounds Greek. And what you would also notice is that you have the 32-bit registers which are being used as well in the same program. So you have move EDI, comma, whatever value, right? And this is something you're going to see in a very common way, which is depending on the task at hand, we would use the whole 64-bit register, just the 32-bit, or even smaller, right? Depends on what the task is. So I would go ahead and say disassemble main, and see that you can see your RAX, RBXs, and a couple of other interesting registers around. And that's all I have for this video. In the next video, we will go ahead and write the very simplest program possible, the customary Hello World program in 64-bit assembly. Thank you very much and have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.